Hey guys, today I'm trying out a new game from some of the developers of Plasma called Retro Gadgets. Now the developers sponsored me to mess around in here, and starting out, I can already see some interesting concepts. Now of course, the first thing I saw here is this Mighty Cobra game, and that seemed pretty interesting, so I want to give that a look. So after closing the multi-tool here, I tried to turn out the start button, but I accidentally picked it up. And that gives away quite a bit about this game already, but you can see once I turn this on here, and finally now hit the start button, pretty much just a standard game of Snake. What's interesting though, is that this entire game was made within this game, and the fact that you're able to make these sorts of things is pretty interesting to me. Now, it seems like the general idea is that you have all of these components in these side cabinets here, and just by taking them out and putting them onto a board, you should be able to make some pretty cool stuff. Now, I didn't really know what I was doing here, but I decided to throw this in the archive and put down a board and see how I would do. Now, starting out, I ended up picking the largest board just to make it as easy as possible for you to get this working, and for putting that down, I tried using the soldering iron here, but I wasn't quite sure of its purpose yet. After that, though, I started messing around with some of the buttons, and it seems like you're able to drag this stuff anywhere you want. Now, that seemed pretty interesting here, and next thing I wanted to do was try adding on a slider or something. Now, I just ended up throwing it down in the middle here, but once I did that, I really didn't know what else to do. So next up, I decided to go over to the Learn tab and figure out how some of the simple demos work. Now, I started out here at their latest LED demo, and this one's super simple. You can see once I turn it on here, every time I push the button, it turns on the LED, and it was once I did this, I finally realized how these things actually work. It seems like everything ends up going through the CPU, and you need to write some code in order to get whatever you want to work working. Now, next up here is a slightly more advanced version of that same thing, and it wasn't the most interesting to mess with, but it did have a lot of good stuff to learn from. After looking through all the code here and roughly figuring out how to get everything to work here, I ended up jumping ahead to the last exercise, and this one's called Mini Console. This thing looked awesome, and I wanted to give it a look here. And already, the graphics capabilities really did not seem that bad. Now, unfortunately, there didn't seem to be any collision or anything, but at the very least, this is still really interesting. And next up, I wanted to look through the community tab and see what other people were doing. Now, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but the first thing that caught my eye was this pixel graphing calculator. Now, it looks suspiciously like another calculator in real life, but once I had it fully printed here, and it does seem to take a while to print, I decided to give this a shot here and see what it could do. And already, it seemed to put up a graph here, and I wanted to try putting something down. Unfortunately, though, I couldn't quite figure out exactly how to get this one working, but at the very least, it did seem really good. And next, what I wanted to do is open up this noisemaker. Now, I did see that there's audio chips in this game, but I wasn't entirely sure how to use them, and once I had this booted up, it seemed pretty interesting. Now, it seems like this device is pretty simple at the moment, and basically what you could do is cycle between different kinds of noise and also adjust the volume of that noise. And after taking a look at the code here, it doesn't even seem that complicated. And with that done, the next thing I wanted to look at here is a little keychain game. Now, at first, I didn't think it was on, but then I just realized that the screen was incredibly dark here, and I guess that's supposed to mimic real life. Now, I tried boosting it a little bit for you guys to make it slightly easier to see here, and it seems to be a fully functional game. Maybe we'll hit this ball button here and give the dog a ball. Now, that was pretty cool, and the next thing I saw here was this huge screen, and I knew I had to print it. So turning it on here, the first thing I wanted to do was just mess around with this joystick, and I could see that I was this little character on the bottom moving around. Now, I went up ahead, grabbed that treasure chest, and brought it back home. It seems like there's a few more levels just like that. Now, I also found some really cool shells, and you can see this one here. Now, the reason I'm calling it that is once I turn it on here, nothing seems to happen when I hit the buttons, and it seems like there's no CPU in here, but it would be pretty interesting to stick one in there and try making it work. Now, I also saw this second calculator in here, and I was hoping this one was going to work a bit better. And booting it up here and try to put in some numbers, it actually does seem to do the math properly. And the final device I wanted to show off here is this cool particle generator. Now, at first, I was trying to figure out how this worked. I could see pressing this button did increase the number, but I wasn't exactly sure what that was doing. It was only once I pulled the slider that I started to slow down the waves here and cause a slight difference. Now, after that, I hit the square button, and a bunch of square particles fell down. The circle button seems to spawn circle particles as well here, and by doing that, they seem to just ride on the waves here, which is pretty interesting. Hitting the X button seems to clear all the particles away, and moving these color buttons around, it seems to affect what colors can spawn in. You also need to flick the switches to really get them to work the way you want, but after that here, I was able to spawn in some purely blue cubes. Now, I switched them over to red here, and with that, I started hitting these buttons in the bottom, and it seems to just throw around these cubes and add a bit of velocity. Now, I figured this button on the bottom may affect how much velocity it's throwing them with, but it didn't really seem to affect it. That's when I realized that button is affecting how many particles are spawning in. So, of course, I had had to know how many particles I could fit in here before it just completely broke, and I got it over 10,000 after not too long. Now, it was noticeably lagging at this point, and definitely having a lot of trouble. In fact, these buttons at the bottom weren't throwing anything anymore, and that's when I knew I probably should stop. Now, before going off and doing my own thing here, I actually wanted to come back to the snake game, and I wanted to edit the code a little bit. You'll see here, I added in 2 lines to affect the color of the snake. Now, as I play the game, you can see those colors cycling. Now, I was glad I did this because I got quite a bit of experience with trying to get the coding to work, but also I generally just think it's pretty cool how you could take existing gadgets and mess with them pretty much as you want. And also, the code in this game is Lua, and if you're not familiar with it like I was, I can say that it didn't take too long to get used to. So what I wanted to do next was throw down 2 boards and try making my own device here. Now, I realized if you put them right next to each other and use the soldering iron, you can link them together into one smooth board. That was pretty interesting, and with that, I actually wanted to put down 4 boards here and make a huge square. Now, after I did that, I started repositioning some stuff on the board, and I threw down a speaker, and I also threw down this gauge. Now, I wanted to figure out how to actually address things and make them work the way I want. After throwing down a CPU and an audio chip here, first thing I wanted to do was start working on the gauge and getting it to move up and down. Now, I figured out here, if I write down this specific line, I can set it to any value between 0 and 100, and that should address the gauge. Now, you can see the needle start to move up a little here, and if I turn it to 30, you can see it moves up a lot more. Now, I won't bore you with all the details, but the next thing I did here was make the gauge sweep up and down, and I figured once I had this working, I pretty well had a grasp on things, and you can see that working here. Now, also slightly diverted here to look at this screen demo, and looking at the code, I got a lot of information of how to make something like this. So finally, now that I had enough knowledge, what I wanted to try doing was make a very crude Kerbal Space Program game. Now, the plan was just to have some sort of orbiter type thing and be able to land on a moon. You can see here, I put down a CPU, put down a graphics chip, put down a screen, and also put down a knob. Now, I'm going to try not to go through the code at all here to show you the results of what I'm doing, and starting out here, you can see I'm able to address the screen and change it to different colors. That was good, but to start drawing the planet here, I put down a circle. After putting it in the middle of the screen here, that seemed not half bad, and next thing I wanted to do was start adding in my orbiter. That's going to be this red square in the middle for now, and you can see I'm able to move the planet around, and that was a pretty basic start here, but next, I wanted to add some velocity so I'm able to keep moving in the same direction. So after making that up here, turning on the device, you can see the planet flies away from me, and that was not half bad. Now, my next few attempts here were trying to make gravity, and the first one wasn't that great. I just sort of went around a circle. The second one here wasn't much better. I just sort of sweep to the side awkwardly, and the third attempt here did seem to work. Now, you'll notice that it glitches out a lot and the planet disappears, but that's actually okay. What I need to do is add some velocity to the side, and that'll get me a stable orbit here. Now, this orbit is really fast here, but I figured in the future I could definitely turn it down, and what I wanted to try doing was increasing the speed here and seeing if my orbit would increase. So setting that to 2, it did seem to work. You can see I get close to the planet on the one side, and I fly away on the other. Now, I really liked that, and next up here, I ended up creating more space, and I tried to add on more screens. Now, to do this, you can sort of mesh them right into each other like this, and once I had 4 screens, it was pretty easy to initialize all of them to the same chip, and just like that, suddenly I had a much bigger field to work with. Now, the game was a little bit hard since you had to be at a constant zoom level, so that's exactly what I wanted to mess with next. See, I have this slider here, and by moving it in and out, I'm able to adjust the zoom level. Now, I also added on some collision with the planet, and you can see here as I fall down, I end up stopping. I also threw down a button here, and this is to give me a small bit of velocity. As I press it, you can see I push up from the planet's surface, and to guide myself around, I added on this D-pad here, and this is going to allow me to steer myself. Now, in conjunction with the red button here, you can see me able to slightly push myself to the side and start to move in that direction. That gives me some pretty good controllability in the game, and next up, I added on this moon. Now, the moon was moving really fast here, so I slowed it down a ton, and already it was a lot better, and I really liked the way this was going, so I ended up just polishing up the game here, and you can see the finished thing here. Now, I'll talk about some of the changes I made here, and the first thing you'll notice is that there's a few extra screens, and there's an extra switch at the bottom. Now, coming off the planet's surface here, you can see I have this yellow line. This is showing the direction that I'm currently traveling in, and it makes it a lot easier when I'm trying to land. Now, also, this big screen on the bottom here is showing my height and my speed. Now, this is relative to the current body that I'm orbiting, and once I get closer to the moon, you'll see those values end up changing. Now, I also have this little screen on the bottom here, and this one's showing the current direction that I'm traveling. Now, the reason I need this is that when I'm really zoomed out, it's really hard to tell what direction I'm facing, and it makes playing the game really difficult unless you're constantly zooming in and out. Now, finally here, you'll also notice there's an auto zoom feature now, and that's what this switch on the bottom is controlling. If you have it on, it automatically is figuring out how far to zoom out in order to get everything in frame. Now, if you turn that off, the slider will still work here, and with all this done, done, I wanted to try landing on my little moon here. Now, this is where my velocity vector is really handy because it's showing exactly where I'm going. Just by positioning myself properly here, I'm able to fall in closer to the moon and get myself to perfectly stop on the surface. And you can see here going for the final landing, the button lights up green, and that means that I won. So it's a pretty simple little game here, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out, and that done, I wanted to try painting this up next. Now, I found the paint tool over to the side here, and it seems like you switch the tip and also the color that you're painting with. Now, just by dragging it over your device here, it seems like you're able to paint it, and you get some pretty intricate designs. I'm not much of an artist, though, so I just wanted to try out some of the different tips and show you how they worked. Now, you'll be able to do some things like triangles, which I could see being pretty interesting if you want to do some sort of directional thing, but also just things like squares, and you put down some hexagons too, because why not? But I really just wanted to paint my whole thing red here and kind of just call it a day. Now, I also wanted to show you something, and that's what happens when you fail in this game. I have it set up so if you hit the surface at more than like 3 meters per second, the button lights up red, and that means you failed. Now, also, one last thing before I go here, there's a really quirky thing about this game, and that's that if you hit F11, whatever device you're using will get teleported to your desktop. I don't exactly know why this is a thing, but it's pretty interesting here, and you can see now I'm using this over my video editing software. So guys, thanks for watching. Retro Gadgets is now available on Steam for early access, so if you want it, make sure to click the link in the description down below. So, if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. And of course, I wanted to thank the developers of Retro Gadgets here for sponsoring me and letting me play the game. If you have any other questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below, and otherwise, till next time.